I think we've maintained the momentum. Of course, I wish it could have been greater, but I think we've done reasonably well. One is we have got the World Health Organization to start the process of following up on many of the things in the political declaration. For example, preparing the goals and targets, preparing the background for a successful partnership. That aspect of things has gone very well. I think we are finding also there's increased interest in many other circles around NCDs and the follow-up to the summit. For example, this weekend there'll be a meeting in Oakland in California which deals with the children and the extent to which we must take account of the children in addressing NCDs. And I'll be speaking more specifically about the life course approach. Why is the life course approach necessary? Why is it important to look at NCDs almost as a pediatric disease, or at least something starting in the womb and in childhood? So there's been a lot of activity. Also, we've been looking at other fora in which we might plant, as it were, the issue of NCDs consequent to the high-level meeting. So there has been a lot of activity. The NCD Alliance has been incredibly active in promoting, agitating, stimulating WHO in one or other direction in terms of addressing the things required from the political declaration. We know that the majority of the poor are women. It is an unfortunate fact, the majority of the poor are women. We know that the burden of NCDs falls disproportionately on the poor. We know that. So ergo, it will fall disproportionately on women. We know that NCDs, the burden of NCDs, not only drives people into poverty, it also stops people from emerging from the poverty trap. So to the extent that more women are poor and women are exposed and subjects to NCDs, one will find that NCDs is one of the causes of increasing poverty in women and maintaining women in a poor state. We know, for example, that NCDs will affect household expenditure. We know that the cost of medication, the cost of attending to care is great in terms of NCDs. We know that. And we know that much of that burden is borne by women and stops women from becoming engaged in gainful employment because they are concerned with the chronic care of persons who have NCDs. So it is a nexus that we must appreciate, a nexus between women, poverty, NCDs. That nexus we must appreciate. Women have always played a major role in ensuring the future of society. We are told in Central America that it was the women who selected the corn to plant for the next harvest to ensure that there would be food. So throughout time, women have played a role in society. But I would like to make the question wider. Why should we have a gender perspective now on this future, on NCDs, on health? There was a time when the concerns about women were framed in biological terms. And women pregnant, women giving birth to babies, the babies being the first sort of entry point into that period for the accumulation of the risks that lead to NCDs. All that is a biological aspect of it. But we sometimes forget there's a gender aspect of it. How does society so construct these differential roles that make women more susceptible to NCDs and make women less able to deal with the NCDs? And one of these you mentioned before is the aspect of poverty. One of these other one you implied was the power relationships within societies that give women less influence in the use of resources, less influence in how societies actually run, that often will contribute to differential exposure to NCDs. I mentioned the aspect of widowhood. There's some people who believe that that's not necessarily a biological phenomenon. It is a gender-based phenomenon. Because men expose themselves to risks at a greater degree early on in life, they die earlier. So there's a gender dimension to it as well. There are other aspects of a gender dimension. Who are the ones under the services? There's evidence now that majority of our health services are being run by women. There's evidence that it's known that women tend to complain more, but women are sicker. So when women go for treatment, women are often not treated as well or with much seriousness as are men, and that is a gender phenomenon. So we know there's evidence that women who have a heart attack are not as likely to be treated aggressively early as men because of the perception of women being complainers and they're not serious, and it's not a serious problem. So that is another expression of the gender differential that affects how women are treated for NCDs. There's another side of the coin that also, because most of the services are run by women, a lot of men don't go to the services often because it's a denial of their machismo. They don't go to the services as readily as they might. A lot of evidence on this. So the gender aspect has to be taken into account, not only in terms of how it affects women negatively, but how it will affect the population as a whole. I would put it this way. Policymakers must focus on the population as a whole. But to the extent that there are aspects of the problem that affect women differentially, then that should be taken account of. I think it would be smart for the politicians to understand the life course approach and the role that women play in ensuring an appropriate life course for all of the population. I think it would be smart to address women as being responsible for much of what happens in the home, being responsible for much of the diet. We speak about obesogenic diets, what people eat in the home. Much of that is determined by women. I think it would be smart to address that aspect of the promotion of NCDs. That is for which women have a role to play. I think it would be smart to accept that women have less opportunity for physical activity than men have, and make it possible for women to have a greater access to the means to have more physical activity. I think it would be smart to recognize that although smoking rates are changing, some places smoking rates are coming down. The tendency for smoking rates to be going up in women and young girls. I think it would be smart to understand that, accept that, and address these kinds of problems. So these aspects that affect women, both as caretakers, caregivers, and as women themselves as being subject to NCDs, I think it would be smart to take those into account. I'm enthusiastic about seeing NCDs figure prominently in the post-2015 development agenda. I would be enthusiastic about seeing that the deficiencies, that the failure to include NCDs in the Millennium Development Goals is corrected. I would be enthusiastic about that. I would be enthusiastic about seeing the countries take very seriously the commitments they made in the political declaration. And I would be enthusiastic, a bit of angst about seeing the various partners coming together and working together to ensure that the political declaration does play itself out in programs at the country level. And I have to congratulate your organization on taking a role in this and trying to stimulate this unity of fellow travelers, if I may use that expression, to ensure that what was committed in September last year does play itself out in programs at the country level. That's a long list of things, but number one among them, I would be anxious to see that NCDs does figure and accepted as an issue that is important for the development of our countries. What you do is to help people to think through their options. So what are the options, I think, for civil society to do? One, I think, to continue along the path which has been started. In other words, to continue to do the things that society does best. That's one. But before doing that, it is very difficult for civil society to come together as one. Very difficult. Because you have different constituencies, you have different interests. But I'm seeing a glimmer that in the area of NCDs, there is some compatibility of interest, some confluence, some congruence of interest to allow more of a common voice, that there is agreement as to the nature of the problem. There's more agreement as to what should happen. And there's more agreement that in an alliance, in a coming together, the various NGO groups can play a major role. I see the really major role for the civil society organizations. And let me break them down. They are I see the non-governmental organizations as one part of civil society. I also see the professional organizations, associations, another part of civil society. I see the media I include in civil society. So I see the faith-based organizations as part of civil society. So when anyone says civil society, there's a plethora of organizations, institutions I would put under that chapeau. One thing that has struck me about civil society is that if one can show that in spite of the different constituencies they address, there's something that can excite them all. The faith-based organizations, can they be excited about the possibility of NCDs and what it does to health and what it does physically, etc., what it does to the body, etc., etc.? Because all religions hold to that view of the integrity of the physical body as well as the soul. If the faith-based organizations could see that, if the disease-specific NGOs can have seen that already and agree to work together because they have more technical expertise in the individual aspects of NCDs. If the media can see that there's a major role in putting to rest some of the myths that surround NCDs. For example, there's a man's disease or there's an old person's disease, putting together some of these myths. It is this confluence of the expertise that rests in different aspects of civil society that could focus on that aspect of NCDs with which they feel comfortable. I think that would make for a tremendous global attention to NCDs as a problem which can be solved.